Breaking news. The front line has erupted in the flames of the Ukrainian armed forces' devastating revenge. Strikes that are burning the Russian army to the ground. A new front is pulsing near Pokrovsk. Putin's army is turning to ashes after this fierce blow. On the horizon near Zaporizhzhia, a fierce confrontation is raging. Gerasimov is slipping away. The Kremlin is trapped in the hell of its own failures. Unhappy Russians are close to saying, "You need to hear this. Donbas and Crimea are being cut off from Russia." Finally, Flamingo was prepared exactly for this. Trump gave the order. Putin was harshly punished. Strikes are coming from all sides. All this in our episode Hell Point. At this very moment, the Ukrainian armed forces have taken their revenge. Pokrovsk pinned Putin's army to the ground. Our forces are methodically crushing the enemy. There was a real rout on the front line. After this, Russian generals have stopped keeping track of their losses. A direct hit. Kupiansk held out. There were battles there that changed everything completely. But now a new front is unfolding. Near Zaporizhzhia, it's a real bloodbath. Ukrainian defenders gave the enemy a taste of their own medicine. Footage that gives you chills. What's happening on the front line right now will show you at this very moment.
Pokrovsk is currently the main hotspot of the Russian-Ukrainian war. The main objective of the enemy is to gain as strong a foothold in the city as possible, according to the Ukrainian armed forces. To achieve this, the enemy is increasingly using civilian clothing. This is how, in particular, they managed to raise the Russian tricolor over the Pokrovsk city council. A few hours later, the defense forces restored the Ukrainian flag to its place, destroying an observation post inside the building and clearing out the enemy in the process. At the same time, fighting continues in other districts of the city as well.
Special units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces have eliminated more than 100 Russian occupiers. This figure only accounts for irrecoverable losses, not including so-called sanitary losses. Currently, the main efforts of the special units, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and the Defense Forces are focused on unblocking logistics for the Defense Forces, expanding the area of presence with the aim of preventing, if possible, the operational encirclement of our units.
At the same time, during the attacks on Pokrovsk, the Russians tried to use the weather as a factor, according to soldiers on the ground, and the first attempts to drive through the city with vehicles have already been recorded.
Meanwhile, a National Guard drone operator from the Hostre Kartus unit is observing an unpleasant trend. The Russians, at the very least, are trying to enter Pokrovsk using vehicles. Unfortunately, the weather is now playing into the occupiers' hands, writes Hostre Kartus. If before we saw Russian troops infiltrating Pokrovsk only on foot, at most there were occasional attempts to break through on motorcycles. Today, because of the fog, we have already encountered the first Russian military pickup truck in the city. They leisurely scattered barricades and drove through the streets of Pokrovsk.
However, they were later destroyed, analysts add. At the same time, the main clashes are already taking place on the far outskirts of Pokrovsk. Both Ukrainian and Russian positions remain within the city itself. Both sides are making a particular effort not to draw attention to themselves so as not to attract a barrage of drones.
The main fighting between Ukrainian and Russian units is taking place on the northern outskirts. The Ukrainian forces that remain deeper in the city are not drawing attention for now. Most likely, they are waiting for reinforcements to increase their counterattacks. It turns out that the ongoing Russian infiltration has deprived Ukraine of control over most of Pokrovsk, creating a gray zone. But Russian soldiers also can't take control of it, they lack the manpower, and the threat from drones is significant.
However, this situational success of the occupiers is primarily due to colossal losses. As our drone operators report, assault groups usually consist of 3 people, with the clear expectation that 2 will almost certainly be killed, and if anyone survives, it will be only 1.
For the Russians in the towns near Pokrovsk and in Pokrovska, losses reach a ratio of 1 to 18 in favor of the Ukrainians. That is, for every wounded or killed Ukrainian soldier, there are up to 18 killed and wounded Russian troops.
Russian units are also aware of these statistics, so every time reinforcements are brought in for the occupiers, it looks something like this. People against the dawn. The hostages are filling in, they're straightening the towels, clicking their tongues. During the roll call, it fills up, I don't want to. Meanwhile, analysts are noting successes by the territorial defense forces in the north, where Russia continues its attempts to outflank our group from the rear. However, each time they
fail. Our fighters have managed to significantly improve their positions in these directions. In addition, there has been significant progress in the Shakov area. This effectively allows us to cut off the so-called incursion of Russian troops into the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses.
Putin's troops are also failing to achieve their objectives in Kupiansk. The city, which according to Gerasimov has supposedly been surrounded for 2 weeks, is putting up such resistance that the Russians haven't advanced a single meter there during this time.
Of course, there is no talk of Kupiansk being surrounded, just like Pokrovsk, because the Russians' plan was to break through from the north across the river and from the south, to cut off a large group of Ukrainian troops, eliminate them, and create a breach in our defenses.
They wanted to do this, but they failed. That's why the assault continues, with attempts to infiltrate from the north into the city in this way. But the defense forces of Ukraine are acting actively both in Kupiansk itself and to its north.
Meanwhile, an unexpected direction of fighting is unfolding in the Zaporizhzhia sector, right on the bed of the Kakhovka reservoir.
Yes, it has dried up enough for soldiers to be able to pass through there. As a result, Ukrainian special forces made their way to the Bilshi Kushuhuri Islands, where Russian opposition forces were already present. The Ukrainians achieved victory, took the islands, and now only a part of the mainland, raised their flag. By the way, this is what Bilshi Kushuhuri used to look like. For a long time after the dam was breached, the bottom of the Kakhovka reservoir remained muddy and soft, but it gradually dried out and became overgrown with grass and shrubs. As we can see, infantry can already move around there. Light vehicles probably can as well.
And finally, to wrap things up, new details have emerged regarding the recent Ukrainian armed forces strike on Donetsk. As is known, a warehouse storing Shahed-type drones was hit there the day before. Now it has become clear how many of them were there.
It is estimated that the number of Shahed-type UAVs, including Iran, stored at the warehouses in Donetsk airport was around 1,150 to 1,200. Were all of them destroyed? That is unknown. According to analysts' estimates, that's about a month's supply of Shaheds for use at the front line, meaning for striking tactical targets on the front, for which Shaheds are essentially converted into giant FPV drones.
Let me remind you, most experts agree that the strike was carried out. Ukrainian Flamingo missiles, which in fact successfully broke through Russian air defenses 3 times in 4 days. There is alarm in the very heart of the Kremlin. The Russian capital is gripped by panic. A real drama is unfolding in the corridors of power. Gerasimov is on the verge of collapse. Putin, in a fit of rage, is tearing into his subordinates. Everyone is afraid of being made the scapegoat as the dictator looks for a new culprit to cover up his own failures. What once seemed like an unshakable state of power is now falling apart before our very eyes. The army is demoralized, generals are turning away, and the system is cracking in every direction. The Kremlin, which sowed fear for decades, has now fallen into its own trap. Whether Moscow can hold on, more on that in just a moment. The last leg of Valery Gerasimov's chair has finally broken. The movement Atezh, citing information from officers of one of the Russian military groups, reports that the Kremlin is extremely dissatisfied with the general's work, and, to put it mildly, his untruthful reports from the front.
Putin gave Gerasimov a deadline to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November. This order is the general's last chance to keep his position. Against the backdrop of this ultimatum, there has been a sharp increase in meat grinder tactics on the Pokrovsk front. The command is sending large waves of personnel into suicidal attacks in order to fulfill the order at any cost.
Unremarkable and lacking charisma, Valery Gerasimov is the man to whom Putin owes his first presidential term. It was he who, while Moscow was preparing to check boxes on ballots, commanded the fighting for the village of Komsomolskoye. This battle, which lasted 15 days, became the key and final one in the Russian Second Chechen campaign. Gerasimov delivered victory to candidate Putin, stepping over the countless corpses of Russian soldiers and local residents.
They let us leave the village, but they didn't let us get far. They were unexpectedly forced to stay for several days on, due to the situation. The outskirts of the village, but in reality they served as a human shield.
In 2012, it was Gerasimov who presented the hybrid warfare formula to the Ukrainian leadership. At that time, he insisted that it was necessary to move away from classical wars towards local destabilization.
The approach is reinforced by the active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
A little later, the Gerasimov formula was first tested by the Russians in Crimea and then in Donbas. According to Bellingcat investigators, in 2014, Valery Gerasimov was the initiator of sending regular Russian troops to Ukrainian Ilovaisk and transferring Russian military equipment to the separatists, from which, among other things, the Malaysian Boeing was shot down. Mute Gerasim, as this grey cardinal of the general staff is called among themselves, has outlasted all his flamboyant and loud-voiced critics.
Those who do not provide us with the ammunition that we desperately need, or will eat them in hell piece by piece. We currently have a severe 70% shortage of ammunition supplies. Shoigu, Gerasimov, can you tell us where exactly is the ammunition?
Prigozhin was blown up. Strelkov-Gherkin is rotting behind bars. After the scandal, it was thanks to Valery Gerasimov's efforts that the favorite was sent there as well. The favorite general of Russian Z Patriots, General Popov. Even Shoigu was carried out of the Ministry of Defense, but Mute Gerasim is still sitting in his chair. Although rumors about his dismissal have been actively circulating since last summer, and now supposedly they really have some basis. If Gerasimov fails to capture Pokrovsk by mid-November, he will be replaced by a certain Viktor Viktorovich Poznikir, who was born and raised near the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Not much is known about him. He was secretly awarded the Order of Zhukov, and in February,
in the year 2024, he was officially promoted to the rank of Colonel General, marking a significant advancement in his military career. The cities of Palmyra and Aleppo, both of which have played important roles in recent military developments, were notable during this time. Poznikir also addressed the ongoing efforts and responsibilities of the Russian military police operating in the Middle East, highlighting their crucial role in maintaining order and supporting stability in the region. Additionally, he openly criticized the continued presence of American military forces, expressing concerns about their impact on the overall situation and the prospects for peace in the area. A bigger stir was caused by the Lieutenant General's statement about U.S. plans to develop a global missile defense system. At the Moscow Conference on International Security, Poznikir called Washington a likely adversary of Moscow. To overcome missile defense, Viktor Viktorovich proposed using the Sarmat and Avangard systems.
it is still unknown whether Gerasimov will be able to outsmart his adversaries again and hold on. Since the summer, the occupiers have been amassing troops in the Pokrovsk direction and probing for weak spots in the Ukrainian defense. On their side are Russia's vast resources, which they spare no expense to achieve their goals, and a large number of fortune seekers who have been lured by contracts and the new status of hero. And in 2025, Pokrovsk could become an important and decisive battle, just like the Chechen village of Komsomolskoye once was.
Exclusive, Donbas is buzzing after a powerful strike by Ukrainian forces. The Flamingos hit their target precisely. The occupiers' underground arsenal turned into a raging inferno. Magyar and his team pulled off the explosion of the century. Russian generals are in a panic. The Kremlin is boiling. After such a fiasco, heads will roll at the top. And that's not all. A new barrage of strikes over Crimea. Drones have precisely destroyed enemy positions. Warehouses are burning. Equipment is on fire. The peninsula is shaking from the explosions. Are these the first notes of the great liberation of Crimea and Donbas? All the shocking details are in the following report.
A unique operation that lasted for months ended with a spectacular explosion in Donetsk. According to locals, nothing like this has ever been seen before in the occupied territories. Where did it hit? What was destroyed? And most importantly, what did the Ukrainian armed forces use to strike?
Judging by the special effects and the massive explosions, it was the Flamingo missiles at work. And
now let's go through everything step by step. The night before, a powerful explosion rocked Donetsk. After that, according to eyewitness videos, a fireball appeared in the sky resembling a nuclear mushroom cloud. Windows were blown out in buildings several kilometers from the epicenter. Right now,
my windows have been shattered.
In reality, this is the area of the Oktyabrski airport. A large ammunition depot, missiles hit there. There is no official information yet, but people are already talking about an ammunition depot. I saw the video. It's spectacular. Most likely, it really is a very large missile or shell depot, because in the video, just like in science fiction movies or computer games, there's an explosion, then a second explosion, and you can actually see this glowing, rapidly expanding shockwave. so it was a very successful strike on the Donetsk depots.
A bit later, this issue was clarified by the head of the UAV systems of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Robert Madjar Brody. According to his information, the strike hit a large depot of Shahed-type drones where warheads were also stored.
The development of this complex target turned into a months-long painstaking intelligence operation, pieced together from tiny fragments. Last night, it was carried out using appropriate strike assets by the Special Operations Forces and the missile and artillery forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Analysts note that despite the range of the Shahed drones, it was very important for the Russians to keep the storage of these drones close to the front line. After all, when the occupiers launch UAVs just a few dozen kilometers from the line of contact, the Ukrainian armed forces simply do not have enough time to respond quickly. As a result, the drones carry out their terror in frontline cities and also strike at the forward positions of our troops.
Disrupting the logistics of supplying shells and rockets for drones in the Pokrovsk direction and in Pokrovsk itself is very important for us right now.
But as for what struck the defense villages, our command preferred to keep silent. One thing is certain, drones definitely took part in the attack. But something else came in right after them.
As the footage from there shows, it was clearly not just drones at work. UAVs, as can be understood, visited the local air defense, but the final blow was delivered by something resembling a rocket. Perhaps it was a drone or maybe even a missile.
The fact that such missiles were used is also supported by Madjar's report about the participation of Ukraine's missile forces in the attack.
I don't think the warehouse with Shaheds was unprotected, that it was just hangars. Most likely. It was probably some kind of underground bunker. And that's another reason why I think these were Flamingos. Of course, they could have used Storm Shadow as well. Storm Shadow would have worked here too. They have an anti-bunker capability. Nevertheless, the scale of the detonation shows that, well, in any case, it seems to me, if you look at the first second, the explosion there was clearly bigger than just a few hundred kilograms of a Storm Shadow warhead.
So yes, most likely it was our Ukrainian Flamingos who for the third time just this week have inflicted massive damage on the Russians. But in Crimea, such power wasn't needed, so drones were sent to attack the peninsula. In occupied Simferopol, around 2:30 in the morning, a fire broke out at an oil depot. It is likely referring to Krimnaftozbad in the area of the village of Bityumna. There were also reports of 4 strikes in Vardiska, after which smoke rose into the sky. There the strikes likely hit the local thermal power plant, which temporarily ceased operations.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Urgently, Washington is shifting to a new phase of diplomacy and action. The United States is deploying large-scale support for Ukraine with continuous deliveries of weapons. It's hard to believe, but the equipment is already on its way to the front lines. Europe is preparing a new wave of missile aid, while Moscow anxiously catches every signal from the West. Putin is on edge. Trump is no longer willing to tolerate his provocations. The White House has clearly defined its course. The Kremlin's blackmail no longer works. How will Putin pay for his actions? This and more in the following report. It seems that even in the East, people have finally lost faith in Putin. No, it seems the Trump administration no longer believes it's possible to reach an agreement with the Kremlin, neither on peace nor on arms control. Now, instead of dialogue, it's about building up strength and supporting allies. The US is strengthening Europe's defense, providing Ukraine with the most advanced weaponry, and returning to a strategy of deterrence. And in Moscow, this has clearly caused some nervousness.
Russia has always faithfully adhered to and continues to adhere to all of its obligations under the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty.
And we have no plans at all to abandon these obligations.
At the same time, it is indeed true that back in my address in the year 2023 to the Federal Assembly, I stated that if the United States or any other parties to the relevant treaty were to conduct such tests, then Russia would also have to take appropriate and adequate countermeasures. This remains our official position.
Putin instructed his loyal subordinates to sniff out exactly what threats the American plans pose.
I am instructing you to do everything necessary and appropriate to thoroughly gather additional information on this important issue and to conduct a careful and detailed analysis within the Security Council. And to submit carefully coordinated proposals regarding the possible and potential commencement of preparations for nuclear weapons testing.
In particular, at the latest Security Council meeting, the bunker was briefed on the U.S. intention to deploy Dark Eagle missile systems in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region.
At the end of this year, the U.S. plans to adopt a new medium-range missile system, Dark Eagle, equipped with hypersonic missiles with a range of 5,500 kilometers. Furthermore, there are plans to deploy this system in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. The flight time of such a missile from the territory of Germany, where this missile system is planned to be deployed, to targets in central Russia will be about 6 to 7 minutes.
Belousov also informed Putin that the United States is working on the development of a new intercontinental ballistic missile, the Sentinel, with a range of 13,000 kilometers, a Columbia-class strategic nuclear submarine, and the heavy bomber B-21 Raider. Donald Trump in turn confirmed his intention to resume nuclear testing. The process will begin immediately, he stated in a video address published on the Truth Social platform. According to him, other countries are already testing new combat systems, and America must do the same to maintain the balance of power.
This is reminiscent of a dance between the Russian and American partners. Still, Russia and Putin are cautiously taking on the role of the follower in this tango, in this dance. And I don't think Russia will officially announce the resumption of nuclear testing before the Americans do. And in this case, Trump is doing this partly as a response to all these aggressive statements from Putin and the Russian leadership about new weapon systems that could supposedly wipe the entire east coast of the US off the map, or fly like the Burevestnik for many years over the earth, emitting some kind of radioactive vapor into the air. And so this is, in a way, his answer. If, in the context of the general escalation of the global situation after the deterioration of relations between Russia and the US and the start of the war in Ukraine, such tests can be resumed. By the way, many military officials in Russia, as well as in America, China, France and England, will breathe a sigh of relief and will gladly do this, since from their point of view, it increases the power of deterrence.
At the same time, Washington is strengthening its capabilities in space. The U.S. Space Force is preparing to deploy 2 weapon systems designed to suppress Russian and Chinese reconnaissance satellites. According to Bloomberg, the Meadowlands system and remote sensing terminals will complement the existing counter-communication system, which was adopted in 2020.
The new systems will be dispersed around the world and sometimes operated remotely. They are intended to counter what American military officials are increasingly describing as the growing Chinese space threat to American forces.
According to estimates by the U.S. Space Force, there are currently thousands of satellites in orbit, and hundreds of them are used for surveillance and reconnaissance. They give the adversary the ability to detect aircraft carriers, formations, and logistics. The Pentagon emphasizes that these technologies are purely defensive in nature. However, experts are convinced that this is about establishing a new level of strategic deterrence. And while Washington and Moscow are measuring their nuclear strength, Europe is preparing for defense. The EU and NATO are creating a system of military logistics corridors, routes by which, in the event of a threat, equipment, weapons, and troops can be transferred to the eastern flank within a matter of hours. The key hubs are Poland, Germany, Romania, and the Baltic countries. The European Commission has already presented the Readiness 2030 plan, a strategy aimed at uniting the continent's infrastructure into a single network. Railways, ports, and airports will operate according to unified NATO standards, and Germany will become the main transit hub for Europe's defense. An emergency has begun in the Russian Federation. The so-called Putin elite, who have just returned from the well-known special military operation, are imposing their own order. However, the dictator does not like this trend. An urgent order has been given to deal with the contract soldiers. A video from the heart of Russia, Putin is beginning to eliminate his own people. At the same time, the Kremlin's mouthpiece has blocked the channels. The topic of the Russian army is now taboo. Moscow is nervous, and not without reason. Russians are no longer staying silent and are taking to the streets in protest. Dissatisfaction is growing and the tension has reached its peak. What will happen next? We'll tell you in just a moment. Don't miss it.
What could be more terrifying for Russians than sending their own son or husband to the front in Ukraine? That's right, if he comes back at all.
In St. Petersburg, a man who returned from the war is terrorizing his apartment building, threatening his neighbors, and throwing some kind of imitation grenades from his balcony.
Very few people want to live on the same street or worse, in the same building with these so-called heroes of the special military operation. As a rule, these newly minted veterans were already notorious outcasts before the war, and after returning from the front, they've completely lost all restraint. Theft, murdering their own drinking buddies, rape and robbery have become everyday occurrences in the peaceful lives of Russian special military operation veterans.
There's a famous saying among our people: there's no defense against a crowbar except another crowbar.
For the Russian ex-cons, drug addicts, and psychopaths returning from the war, that other crowbar will be waiting for them. How can I put this more delicately? The story with the sledgehammer. It's hard to believe, but Russian propagandists are increasingly speaking openly about killing or resetting their own soldiers. Bloggers insist that there is no place for participants of the special military operation in civilian life. The state isn't even considering bringing them back and helping them adapt to peaceful life. All these people who have received weapons, gone through the war, and some of them have a very serious, even criminal past. Something has to be done with these people. And on top of that, it's far from the best of the best who are coming back from the war. The new Putin military elite, as the bunker man calls it, is made up entirely of convicts who were granted amnesty. I would really like to actually look directly into the eyes of the person who made the decision to use prisoners in combat situations, because honestly, that's a ticking time bomb just waiting to explode. And it's going to explode inside Russia itself.
Or maybe they're just idiots, that's also possible.
A significant portion of our contingent at this point already consists of people who, while being in places of detention or under investigation, sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. In doing so, they either escape punishment and trial, or they get out of camps, out of prisons, and get the opportunity, as they say, here we say, to atone for their guilt with blood. But in reality, they get the chance to be free for a while, and possibly, if things go well, to eventually walk free, fully pardoned, maybe even with awards and so on and so forth. The solution that the Kremlin has found is both ingenious and cruel at the same time. There are rumors that Putin has simply ordered that no one alive should return from the front. Putin wants to send the prisoners loyal to the authorities to Africa. As for the rest, following the old Wagner PMC tradition, they are to be disposed of. The first option is to send them somewhere to Africa. The second option is that, in general, they will, well, how to put it more gently, the story with the sledgehammer. At the same time, it is worth noting that such a proposal, which is increasingly voiced by Kremlin propagandists, seems to have received tacit approval from the Russian population as well.
Because this is Russian Nazism. You see, they get a thrill from death. It's the only thing that truly excites them.
A full-scale campaign against Russian contract soldiers who have returned from the special military operation is also being waged on Russian federal channels. There, around the clock, 24/7, they keep persuading people to sign a contract with the Ministry of Defense. But when it comes to the death toll at the front, the Kremlin has ordered silence. For example, Russian propagandists cut from the broadcast a part of Putin's conversation with an 11-year-old girl who asked the president to bring her uncle back from the war.
What would you like to be done with your uncle?
Well, he's currently on a mission at the front. He was wounded in the arm. He was in the hospital, but they're not treating him at all. And now they're sending him back on a mission. And I would like him to be transferred to a good hospital in Russia.
Russian propaganda has been given the command, attack! The Kremlin's mouthpiece has been tasked with going after their own soldiers. Sit quietly and pretend you're not being beaten. It seems Putin is tired of playing war with old toy soldiers. So the bunker dweller ordered to get rid of them.
Weakness is unacceptable because it creates temptation, the illusion that some issue with us can be resolved.
Endless video appeals from grief-stricken Russian mothers, desperately trying to find their children who have gone missing at the front, pleas for help from wounded and abandoned contract soldiers left without medicine or medical care, and complaints from mobilized troops about the unbearable conditions of service in the Russian army. It seems Vladimir Vladimirovich has had enough of it. But instead of actually attempting to solve the problem, the bunker dweller prefers to simply ignore it and has now issued an official order to Russian propagandists to stop any and all discussion about the ongoing troubles and difficulties within the Russian army.
It's not necessary, not needed, and simply absurd.
Putin only needs soldiers on the battlefield. Outside of it, all these people become a threat to the Kremlin. Those who are unscrupulous and highly skilled with weapons can, in particular, cause significant problems for the regime.
What I want to say is this. The workers in the swamps carefully record everything very clearly, and they hide absolutely nothing.
There will be an order to send them home only as a last resort. Only as a last resort. And even then, only if... In other words, the order is to scatter them wherever possible in any available place.
Those who refuse to be scattered face liquidation. That's all for now. This was me, Darina Hutskalo. There will be even more hellish news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.